Hello and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place where we share creative and inspiring learning in our schools. Season 2, Episode 29. Hello and welcome back to the Education on Fire podcast with me, Mark Taylor. And today I've got Peter Cansell coming back on, and we're going to chat over some of the different interviews that we've had over the last few weeks, and just sort of get a head teacher's perspective on these things. And while a lot of them sound like fantastic ideas, we also know that actually getting your school involved in these things and sort of convincing your head teacher or some of your senior management to take them on board, even if as a teacher you're enthusiastic about it, isn't necessarily as straightforward as that. So we're going to sort of take that sort of inside school tack today and just sort of chat over all of those things. So hi Peter, and thanks for being on again.
Hello Mark, how are you?
Brilliant, thank you very much. So let's start with the NAPE conference interviews that we did, because you were there as part of NAPE, as you're on the National Council as well, in terms of sort of setting it all up. So give us a little bit of a background about why they decided to do the conference and how well you think it went in terms of what the audience actually got out of it from being there.
Well, it was interesting because the original proposal was to run a trade fair from an ICT point of view for schools. And my experience as a head teacher said, I'm not going to come out for that. I can get all that online. I don't need people to tell me what I'm going to buy. And I haven't got time. So, thinking from that perspective, what I suggested was that actually you need something to hook people in, and it needs to be value for money. If people can spend time out of school, it needs to be worth them spending time out of school for. And so we said, well, we've got contacts with some really good speakers, Mars Berry, Tim Rylands. Tim, who's always engaging, is really good. Stuart, who is vice chair of NAPE, was also available as well, and Stella James. And so we started putting together this package, which we felt would attract people to come and actually enjoy the trade fair as part of the experience of getting the information from people who are experts in their field. And it went together really well. The highlight for me, I have to say, was in the afternoon, seeing 50-odd teachers and head teachers sitting on the floor playing with Lego and making things. Absolutely brilliant, and you don't get the opportunity at many conferences. And so, I think all the feedback we had was absolutely positive. Everybody was said, this is a really good conference. We've enjoyed it. We enjoyed the mix of things. And I was just in a meeting yesterday talking about that, that there will be another one in October.
And I really think, like you just said there, what was so exciting about it was the fact that the first event where all the teachers were sat down and they were Tim was the first speaker, and everyone's there not quite sure how it's going to pan out and what's going to be done, whether they're going to be talked to or whether there's going to be some participation. And it was just the fact that almost instantaneously, once it started, that air of anticipation got exciting, and all the sort of the concern that some people have when they go to these things just lifted, and it was just a lot of fun. The whole day was fun. The talks and the information were incredibly useful for everybody that was there. But I think it, just like to say, the engagement of it was probably something you can't get anywhere else. It needs to have that kind of that content and that two-way street of a speaker and an audience, and then, like you say, once you add the fact that you're then actually participating in a workshop almost, rather than just a speaking event, then it really takes on a whole new life, doesn't it?
Yeah, and Tim was brilliant at that. We knew Tim from before, so we knew what we were getting with him, and he was bound to deliver something which was engaging and would make people stop and think, and that's great, and enjoy themselves, and to start the day with that is really good, and there was a mix added to that, but I mean, some of the things that Tim was using, there was a wonderful hologram thing that he was using, which had people sitting in the front row of the audience stroking an elephant, but which clearly didn't exist, but they could see it then. We could see it on the screen, this person's hand coming out and stroking the elephant. It was really bizarre, but you could see how kids would love that in the school. And and it was all simple stuff. It wasn't major major understanding of technology or anything of that sort. You just click on a few buttons and you could get it.
And that's really key, isn't it? Because it has to be accessible. You know, you can wow people with things which cost a lot of money, but it has to be, you know, what can we put into the schools? What have we got access to? And how can we make these things, you know, make our kids feel inspired? And that was exactly it. That the whole premise is the fact that you can actually do this, and we're here to give you the ideas and the chance to do that. And that's really where I think the whole thing was such a success. And having spoken to the people in the trade fair stuff as well, you know, I think the engagement from the people in the actual workshops and the speeches actually then sort of came through into the people, because they were much more engaged in walking around and chatting to the people that had some stalls there, because they're already in that sort of frame of mind. So I think everyone was a winner from that point of view.
Yeah, and it is important, I'd said at the beginning as a head, I wouldn't have gone out to a trade fair, but it's really important, particularly in ICT, to go out and find out what is out there. And that's why BET's always such a success, because people need to know. You know, we're always so far behind in education, in schools, in grasping the new technology. You know, if you just cast your mind back just a tiny bit on how long it took the hardware that we need. You know, schools will still be behind with their hardware even now, but there are people out there now getting iPads and getting this. But you know, how long have iPads been around? You know, and they're only just starting to come into schools. The only thing that gives me hope is that, having spent some time visiting schools in France, you know, they were much further behind than we were. So, you know, I don't know whether that's a hopeful thing or a Brexit thing or what it is. I don't know.
well, that remains to be seen, doesn't it?
I'm sure it'll all change.
I think one of the things that I've noticed over these weeks of chatting to different people is the fact that the technology is much more encompassing, and having partners within your development of ICT and computing is really important. It's like you say, just having a set of iPads is brilliant, but it's what you're going to do with it then. You know, what are you going to do when they need updating? What do you do when you need to actually upgrade them and get another set of them? And so I think the partnerships between the companies and the organisations that can do the broadband for you, the ones that can look after all the technology, that can keep you up to date enough so that you can actually keep pushing the boundaries, I think those relationships are going to become more and more important.
Yeah, they are. And the key thing, and I think this came across in the season's podcast that we've had, is that we are at a point now where the hardware isn't really an issue, because most of it can be done on most platforms, many platforms quite often, and so now it's about, and I think I've been fighting for this for a long time. You know, as someone that whose early teaching career was using BBC Micros and RM stuff, you know, Nimbuses. You know, I know how desperate we were to get people to develop the software, and in order to use it. Now people are developing software and apps. Everything seems to be quickly available, particularly with apps, you know, that people are familiar with using them on their phones and on iPads and so on. And so that's the exciting thing for me, is that we're not now held back by not having sufficient hardware. You know, having one computer in the classroom was a problem, I have to say, especially when it was run by cassette.
Yeah, absolutely. Take the whole lesson to load, ready to go again. Exactly. And it seems to me, from when we were chatting to Lee Parkinson, it was more the fact that just having access to the apps and the hardware is the starting point. But then it was sort of his insights were much more about, you know, what do you do with them there? You know, if you've got the chance to read a blog, then let's find a way of actually writing one. You know, if you've got some recording stuff to do and you can listen to music and all that sort of thing, then, you know, create some music. You know, and it was how you use the apps and how you use the hardware to then be creative. And I thought that was a really exciting thing, and that's something which we can really support teachers in doing, I think.
Yeah, I thought that the stuff with Lee was fantastic. Actually, the range of things that he was discussing were really important. Exactly as you say, you know, it's not about being restricted. It's about making use of it in the real world. You know, and that's the important thing from what he was saying, I thought. And with many of these things, you know, it's how we can relate to what children are doing to what's happening in the real world, and actually exceeding what's happening in the real world in a number of cases. And you could tell that with the podcast with Arnav, which I thought that just demonstrated for me how much we, even as primary teachers and primary head teachers, underestimate the abilities of our primary age children. I thought what he's doing is phenomenal stuff, and clearly, he's a young man who is somewhat gifted in that area, but actually, I know from experience that if you give them the opportunity, young children would do phenomenal things, and the problem is not necessarily with teachers and head teachers. It's often about the system. How do you measure what Arnav is doing with his SATs? How will anybody know from his SATs results what he's able to do? He would probably, I should think, do very well in his SATs, but I don't know. But it's not a measure of education. Education is much, much broader than just the simple things of maths and English and whatever, and being able to demonstrate the first part of a declension of a verb. And it demonstrates for me how important it is for us to let children explore ideas and then spend time on things. That what he had done was spend quite a lot of time developing these ideas. Our system in primary schools, well, and in secondaries as well, I guess, is very much against spending time developing ideas. And it goes beyond what he was doing, and what is possible to do is going beyond just the narrow confines of ICT. We tend to restrict things into subject areas, don't we? We define it in a particular way. And you can't do that. It's got to be cross-curricular. It's got to be developing in all sorts of ways.
And speaking of Arnav, the one thing that came across was one that, like you say, he had the time because he was learning his coding through Khan Academy. He'd obviously been given a Raspberry Pi and was able to do that. But the soul of his project, despite his obvious talents in that kind of development, was the fact that he was trying to help people. That came across in both the apps for good interviews and all of those things. When you heard the children talk about them, they were so excited. It's about the process. The tech was enabling them to do something they wouldn't normally be able to do within their class because of the support from the organisations and the mentorship. But actually the creativity side of it was what was really getting them fired up, and to be able to follow that through over a number of weeks and months, and then to have the thing develop so they could actually physically have something to show, was the really key thing. I think that was a real theme through the whole season. Really, it was the fact that it's a way of the inspiration coming through. It was people working in groups, and it was also within the sort of the ICT umbrella, if you like. They were also talking about the fact, some people helped do the designing, some people were organising, some people were helped doing the publicity. And so within that umbrella, that was their talents coming through. And when you're working in a group of people where you've got the time, when you can organise yourselves, people do actually work to their strengths.
Of course. And then it goes beyond that, because the next stage after that was for him to talk about it, and for him to be interviewed about it, and to have that confidence. It builds things which are intangible: confidence, self-confidence, self-esteem, all those things. Not necessarily for Arnav, because he might have been confident and articulate beforehand, but for some children it would enable them to develop that, because they have that opportunity, because they've been put in that position of exploring their abilities, and then it brings further opportunities.
I think actually Arnav had actually said as well that he was actually quite shy before. I think that was one of the real plus points for him, was the ability to be able to speak and stand up and be much more himself. And so, as a teacher, if you've been listening to this season and you've sort of been inspired to try and get some of these things into your school, whether it's part of the barefoot computing or anything like that. How would you go about then speaking to a head about implementing it? Because we know one of the barriers is money, and we know the Apps for Good organisation and also the Barefoot, they were both free resources. So you haven't got a money barrier, but you do have a sort of a change of tack barrier, I guess, in terms of implementing something new or taking time out of your timetable, depending on how your timetable fits within your school. So, I mean, is it the kind of things that we're talking about that you need to press, which you think would make the difference?
It is. I mean, that word "free" is a key word for all head teachers. They like that word. And I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I was thinking to myself, well, yeah, what do you do? How do you persuade a head that actually, making the year sixes do extra study for SATs at this time of year isn't that important? As a head teacher myself, I didn't feel that it was that important. I thought it's part of life. But actually, it's not going to change their life, whereas a lot of these things will change their lives. So it's about being able to have those conversations. It's bigger than just trying to persuade the head teacher to do this thing. It's about changing the culture, and it goes beyond schools, because, of course, schools are just part of the system, and we're bound up in the notion that the only way you can judge a child is by testing them. And they have no quality or value at all unless you test them, and they are at a particular level, or whatever you might call it now, of they equal so many apples. It's nonsense. Anybody that knows about education knows that it's nonsense, but we work in systems that demand that, and it's a political issue, isn't it? I thought that one answer is some of the stuff that Lee Parkinson was talking about, which is about not considering it as a subject, but making it cross-curricular, about using ICT, using these apps, using all these wonderful ideas as part of what you have to do anyway. So, despite my moans about testing, there are still areas of the curriculum, still areas of the timetable where there is that freedom. I was struck by some of the stuff that was being done, which seemed to me, and I'm trying to remember who it was that was talking about, but there was something which linked for me to some work that we were doing in my school, which was called Mantle of the Expert. I don't know if you know about Mantle of the Expert, but this is a format where which was developed by somebody called Dorothy Heathcote quite a long time ago. It's pursued by a number of schools. There's a website about it, so if you put Mantle of the Expert into Google, you will find lots of stuff about it. What happens is that you set up a company, you get the children to set up a company to take on a particular project. For instance, one of the things that we did was we said, okay, for our summer fair, we're going to have cake stall, or teas rather, the cafe type thing. So how about if class 4 take responsibility for this? So we got the teacher or I wrote to the teacher, wrote a formal letter to the teacher saying I would like class 4 to be responsible, but it has to be properly costed, it has to be properly run, everything has to be made properly. They can buy things in. We would provide some seed funding if necessary. All those sorts of things that you would have with setting up a small company, but they had to operate as a small company, and they were, it was wonderful. And we've had much more abstract things that worked with a final product, which was a cafe at the end of it. But we've had much more abstract things than that. We had one group who were developed some recycling because they wanted to extract metals from paper in the classroom, and so they set up a recycling company. And you change it as the teacher, you facilitate it. It's very much child driven, but you change it by the use of letters which come from the people that have contracted you to do the work. And these clears, of course, are quite imaginary, but they can develop and steer the work. And it struck me, it was when Chris Aiken was talking. He was talking about the way in which the teachers are facilitators, and he was talking about science, wasn't he? About apps for good and science happening in his classroom.
That's right.
And I was just struck by how the children get driven along by the passion of what they want to do, as well as the teachers driven by it. But the children are driven by their passion, and the teachers are just supporting them. And the teachers are also learning how all the external experts that come in, because I think that was Barefoot stuff as well, wasn't it? That
yes,
was talking
that's
right. Buy it from industry, and all drawing in all this expertise, and actually having something which fits to a real life problem. I think can be very rewarding, and helps children to be so much more engaged with what they're doing.
I mean, I certainly like the idea of feeling like your school as an environment, and also your learning experience as an environment, is part of the bigger world. I mean, that just seems like a very important thing to do, and bringing people in. And I think one of the things that Lee Parkinson had said was about they were doing some writing, which they then published on their blog, and because of social media and because of the fact that everything's online, it might have been to do with a poet or something like that, and then you get immediate interaction almost back from the person that you might have been studying, if they're still alive, and you're working in that sort of modern day, they then get tweeted back or Facebook back and that sort of thing. And so it has real purpose, has real life to it. And I think what you said there is really key. But I'd be really interested to know, do you think teachers these days have not necessarily have the skills, but because, like you say, a lot of the way that you have to teach these days is quite formulaic, it has to be quite time sensitive, having to sort of step out of that boundary of being more of a mentor or a facilitator in those projects where they're much more child-led. Do you think that people actually feel a little bit kind of out of their comfort zone in that, or do you think that's something that they'll embrace?
I think they definitely feel out of their comfort zone. It's quite scary because we've had 15 years or longer of persuading teachers that they should teach to the test, but also teach to the curriculum. So it's all with the national curriculum. It laid out what people should teach, and it's all done by numbers almost. When 3 or 4 years ago it was suddenly announced, oh well, you don't have to teach the national curriculum, you don't have to use this, you can find it. Or when they said you don't have to use levels anymore, you have to find something else. People found it very scary, because if you insist that people do things for X number of years, after a while they find it difficult to do it in a different way, and that's the situation we find ourselves in. But if you can get somebody in the school who can become excited and passionate about it and will persuade people, I think that there's the opportunity there to change things. But it is about passing on these ideas. I thought Lee's stuff, I was very intrigued by a lot of what he was saying, he encourages children, but also teachers to be creative, and in the way they use ICT, and it's across all platforms. But he was saying how we're stuck in the past, and we are. We need to push forward. We need to recognise that the children that we're teaching will be in a totally different world to the children we've taught in the past. They will have different things to worry about and different things to cope with.
I think that's absolutely true, and that's where Arnav was such an inspiration, because he'd found something in the world that he wanted to help and support, and he was able to go and do it on his own. It wasn't a school project, it was something that he'd done, because in this day and age you can go to the Khan Academy and you can teach yourself coding, and you've got the time to do that. And I think that was really important, and I think the enthusiasm thing, I think as a teacher, being your best self in that thing is probably the best thing you can do to try and sell it to a school, if indeed you need to sell it to a school. It was a bit like when I was chatting to Simon, the volunteer for Barefoot.
Yep.
It was his enthusiasm. I mean, you could just see he was passionate about the education side. He was passionate about the children. He could relate it to his sons that were sort of just been through that sort of stage as they were a little bit older then, but being able to then put something back, being a volunteer and actually say, no, this is something I want to do. I can really see the benefit for it, and I can see how it then gets taken on through the class and then through the school, and especially something like Barefoot, which you can embed across all different age groups and all the way through it. And when I was at the BT Tower and I was chatting to the teachers there about that and how they were doing that, you suddenly thought, yes, actually, this is a really, you just need that one or two people just to go, oh yeah, I get this, and we can then start to put that in place, and things really can sort of take off. And I think also on the podcast I did with Chris Moss from Piotr Apps, I think one of the most important things he said about that, and I think it's a great idea, I think communication's a really important thing, but it was the fact that actually you could go to them and say, I think this is a really good idea. I need to take it to my senior management. How am I going to do this? And they'll actually create the app for you. They'll put your school branding on the app so that when you're going to your head teacher or you're going to try and get the funding to get it done, you've actually got it for free on a free trial with your school app already in hand. And as he said, once you're there actually showing them what it can do, then it's almost a no-brainer. Once you've got that far, you can do it. And I think having that ability just to get people through the door, to show them what it actually is before they have to part with any money especially, is really important. And the fact that I thought it was great value, I know, £200 just to set it up, and then I think it was £500 for each year after that. I mean, as I said on the interview, as a parent, I'd pay the £1 or £2 just to have that from the parental point of view, knowing that I've got a school app which has got everything I need in all one place, because I do spend an awful lot of my time trying to find the last letter or the last email or tweet about something which has gone awry. But I think it is, like I said, it's literally just that ability to be able to say, look, this is it, I can show you it, it's here. And I think the technology really supports that, because so many of these things are online now that you can say, look, let's just look at this, or here's the app that we can use, or here's someone talking about what's gone on. And that's kind of the whole point with this season and this podcast as a whole, is it's that sort of literally showing you what's already there, what's out there, and what can be achieved before you actually need to just sort of sell a concept. You actually can sell something which is already available.
And once you've achieved that, of course, you then got breaking down the fear factor in other staff, in your colleagues, because that's, and I think Simon was talking about that as well. But with the barefoot stuff that he was talking about, it breaks it down into manageable bits, so that actually it enables, because with the best will in the world, I have to say that it's probably harder to engage teachers with a new way of doing things than it is to engage children. That children will just take to it and they'll do it and they'll give it a go, and if it doesn't work, they'll give it a different go. Teachers like it all to work first time and to be on top of it, and that's really hard for teachers, because they feel they have a responsibility to be in charge of what's going on. Primary teachers are notorious for that, and you have to let go sometimes. You have to let go and just try it and see. And hopefully, talking, I know when Lee was talking, he mentioned someone called Richard Gerver. Richard's one of our associates of Oxford School of Thought, and he is a wonderful speaker, but he just encourages people. And I would recommend anybody that gets a chance to listen to him, because he will tell you that you can do it, that it's possible. If you want to do it, you can do it. And but you do need support. You do need that sort of support of people saying to you, yeah, go out there and try. You can do it. You can do it. We've had too long where teachers haven't been trusted. We've had too long where we've been told, well, you're not really that good at doing these things, so we'll tell you how to do it. Actually, most of the teachers that I know are phenomenally good at doing things. They're very capable of doing things if they believe in it, and if they believe in themselves.
And I find that a lot, and I've said this on previous interviews, going into schools and doing music and that sort of thing, there are lots of teachers who are slightly fearful about, how am I going to do this? But once you just get everyone doing it, and fear generally is, fear of the unknown, fear of being out of your comfort zone. So once you can just bring each of these things back to the first step, what do I do now? What am I trying to do here? What am I trying to achieve there? Let's go with the flow. We'll set it off and see where we go, but we'll support each other in that journey. Then the fear disappears, because then you're on a positive path, aren't you? So. when you're in that frame of mind, the fear has to go, because you can't have, you know, that enthusiasm and fear in the same thought, and that's sort of an important sort of well-being tack as well. It's just that kind of, you know, where you focus your energy is a really important key to what your results would be in the path that you're going to go on.
Yeah, and so many of the people that you spoke to, what came across more than anything else was their passion, was their desire to make it happen, and you need that. You need people that can go out there and make you want to do it. I think there are, I don't know if you followed up on Lee's website. If you looked at his website, or he's got some stuff on, and some wonderfully amusing things. The Oxford Reading Tree stuff that he's been doing with Mrs. May, which is great to see the Prime Minister doing a useful job. Actually, I thought doing something socially valuable, but it's great fun, you know. And he's all tongue-in-cheek stuff, and is very very funny. But you know, those sorts of ways in of just making people think, you know, just have a little bit of a giggle, and then perhaps think, well, actually, you know, I could enjoy this. We all could do a bit more enjoyment in life, I think. I always wanted to have it in my school. I always used to say to parents that, you know, I can't show you any evidence to show that children learn better when they're happy. I've got quite a lot of evidence to show they don't learn very well when they're not happy. But it's true of teachers as well. You know, they teach better and they do a better job when they're happy and when they're enjoying what they're doing.
That's absolutely true, and I think you're right. I think some of the things that Lee creates, and he has some incredible followings of these things. I was watching one of his clips of with what teachers do in singing assemblies, and their different takes on those things, whether they're miming or whether they know the words or don't know the words or think they're a rock star or whatever it happened to be. But it was something like sort of 400,000 views or something, you know. I mean, it really lots of engagement through there, and I think as the interview I did back in season 1 with Kelly Long, when we were talking about, you know, sort of Facebook groups and the internet and how all that works in terms of supporting everyone, it's just that's an awful lot of people watching something and enjoying the content, and actually from there getting access to information which is incredibly life-changing and supportive for you as a teacher and also within a school. And like I say, I think actually, you know, us all lightening up about these things, yes, we're doing an incredible job, but we should be enjoying the journey with the children that we're actually teaching as well, and learning from them as well. And I think if whatever way you can actually get into that frame of mind of just thinking, oh great, it's another day, let's see where we go, then I think we're really on to a winner then.
And I think there was an important thing in when you were talking to Simon, he was something that I don't know whether he said it or whether I just inferred it from what he was saying. But he was saying that there isn't much to change, actually. It's just a small difference in the language that we're using. And, you know, if people can understand that, there isn't, you know, most of us are using apps and using things in our real lives outside of school. And it isn't a big step to use them in school and to use them, you know, in the way that people are demonstrating. And I think that, you know, if we can convince people it's not that hard, I think we can actually get a long way and get towards the sort of goals that you and I both feel are right.
I think that's right, and I think that's one of the things that just struck me then as you were talking about it, is that there are levels of these things, aren't there? And it's all very well listening to a podcast and getting excited about the prospect of something, and then suddenly in the cold light of day standing up in your class going, this feels a little bit different to how I felt when I was listening to it on my commute on the way in, or when I was doing my workout, or whatever it happened to be. Yeah. But I think that may well be why something like the Apps for Good is such a good thing, because while you have to take a little bit of a step back in terms of how you teach it and present it within your class, you do have everything that you need to at your fingertips. You know, the resources are online. You know, you have access to people coming in and mentoring, and you get all the support that you actually need. So if you want to have a slightly different change of tack in your school in a slightly different direction, you can use something like that which is really already made for you, and then it's just a question of coordinating it. And then from there you can expand. So then talking about, having a school blog if you haven't got a school blog, or completely changing how you're using computing across the curriculum, you then start to feel that you've got a bit more confidence about that yourself, or being able to take that to the rest of the staff and showing how to do that. And talking about Lee Parkinson, to be able to say, look, this is how we can do it. We can either get an inset in, or we can all follow his blog and his website and find these things, and from there you find other people in different parts of the curriculum that you can do, and you can do it stage by stage, bit by bit. You don't have to literally jump off the cliff and then think, now I'm going to do this, but I'm not quite sure how. The support is there in whatever stage you're at.
And it's important to have things exactly like this podcast, Mark. Education in the UK, education across the world, I think, is benefiting enormously from people like you who are standing up and saying, actually, I'm going to do that, and starting something like this, which has got to be, well, from the feedback that comes up, you can see is really helping people to support. I find it quite interesting because the feedback that you get is not from people that are suddenly engaging with it and saying, oh, I never knew that and I'd like to do it. It's actually giving them the confidence to say, yeah, that's right. I'm going to redouble my efforts now, because I really think that what you're saying, it's given me the confidence and the authorization in a way to go and do those things. And that's part of it, isn't it? It's about being authorized to work in a particular way.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I have talked before about you think that your world is purely just the four walls of the school, and depending on what the environment's like, that's kind of how it has to be, and opening it up sort of through the podcast, and knowing that there's a whole tribe of people out there, a whole staff room, if you like, of people who do think your way, who are trying to progress things, who are trying to, be really enthusiastic and find new ways of doing things, if that's not necessarily the way that your school generally does it, that gives you a real boost, because you think, actually, no, the percentage might not be high in my school, but the percentage of the people that I'm hearing through the podcast, or the people that I'm watching on YouTube, there are people there, and actually that we are making a difference, and we do have some control. And I think the control is probably quite an important factor, isn't it? The feeling like you can actually, within the constraints of the curriculum, you can actually do things and make a big difference, not only to the students that you're teaching, but to the way that you're teaching, and therefore your experience of actually being a teacher. And that's probably key, especially in this day and age where time and money is tight. You can actually do it in such a way that you can still keep that next day I'm still excited, rather than 2 or 3 weeks into a new term starting to feel that burnout already kicking in.
Yeah. Well, having experienced that recently with teachers who are just struggling to get through the day, and it partly because they're not really enjoying what they're doing. They can't see beyond the narrow confines that they've been set for them, and we need to break out of that. Can I just ask you a couple of questions, Mark?
Of course.
It might be that one of the roles that I can have is to be that dim person who doesn't know what they're talking about, as well as being an expert. It fits in well with the Govian pattern of education, it seems to me. I was a bit confused at some point when I was looking at all the different podcasts. There's a difference between Apps for Good and Tech for Good. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes. Apps for Good is an organisation that actually the whole project is about going into schools and basically within the school you get the chance to develop an app. So the principle behind it is that within teams within your class, or however you decide to take it up, what you're going to do is you're going to think of something, a situation in life that you want to change or support. So for example, in the Apps for Good awards that you heard about, there was Lilies and there was Deploy and various things like that. One of them was to do with helping a disabled relative in terms of getting a job, that sort of thing. So you sort of come up with that concept, and then you How can we create an app that can help that? What do we need it to service? How are we going to support it? And you design it and you think about it, and then you get the support to take you through to submit it. And then if you're one of the people that then goes even further in the process, having had all that support, if the awards, then the few people at the very end then get the chance to get them actually developed, and I think they were put onto Google Play. Whereas the Tech for Good is slightly different, because it can be any age, rather than it being necessarily a school-specific thing. But it's an award that's there to celebrate what is already going on. So if you have something you're doing anyway, or something that you've already created, or something you'd like to show off and get some more publicity and be part of a community that supports that sort of thing, that's what the Tech for Good Awards are for. And it was developed through AbilityNet, which is the conversation I had with Mark Walker, and he was there sort of telling us about sort of how they were doing that, and just basically wanting to connect the dots up really between, I've got this idea and I've created this thing, but I don't quite know where to go now. So through the award system, you then have this big network, and you can talk to this person, you can talk to that person, and we can all have a big chat and improve and expand the community. And from there, we'll see where it progresses. So it's just kind of that way of sort of lighting the fire of things that are already happening and seeing where they go.
So it's a similar idea, but it's not limited to apps. It's technology across the board.
Absolutely, it's technology more than apps. And interestingly, Apps for Good were someone that actually were involved in the Tech for Good Awards, even though they're called Apps for Good. So they'd sort of gone through the same process as well.
I can see why I'm confused, because what it struck me that what Arnav had done was actually an Apps for Good thing, but he couldn't do Apps for Good because he wasn't 10 plus, and that just struck me as a bit daft to limit it to 10 plus, actually, to be honest. And quite clearly children much younger than that are capable of doing things which would fit into their model, but his thing that he did would have fitted the Apps for Good criteria, wouldn't it?
It would, in as much as because of the coding and that kind of thing, but it's not an app per se, because what he'd actually done is he'd actually developed the actual piece of kit with the sensors and all of the things on a Raspberry Pi as well. See. So it's actually a device rather than an app as such. Right. So and so because that his way of developing it was that he wanted to create a device which would support people who had asthma, and so the coding side of that came purely through wanting to make his device actually have a way of working.
I understand. See, I'm learning as I go, even at my age.
So tell me, from all the things that you listened to throughout the season, is there anything else that struck you, or anything else you want to touch on before we round everything up?
I think that the links to the real world, the coding for a purpose stuff that came out of Apps for Good, I thought was really good. And the partnerships, the fact that there are partnerships out there, both through that and through the barefoot stuff, I think needs flagging up more, because that's one of the things that I've discovered as I've been developing the Oxford School of Thought, is that even as what I thought was quite a well-informed education professional, there were so many things I didn't know about, linked to education, bodies and resources. There's so much there that you don't know about, and I thought I was getting loads of information. So it's about communication. It's about making sure people know about these things, and that's very hard. It's very hard for marketers, because actually there are a lot of barriers set up to stop marketing stuff getting into school. It's hard for people to have even informal approaches to schools, and so perhaps there should be some way of setting up some links to schools, so that they do find out about these things, and the NAPE conference is a good way of doing it. I think that those sorts of ideas and platforms are a good way of getting people to be more aware of what's going on. And I think, from my perspective, the NAPE one, which was clearly a locally based one, rather than the BET conference, which, for all its benefits, is so massive that, it's overwhelming, I think, to some extent. But you do get, loads and loads of ideas of new stuff that's out there and coming. So we need to find ways of breaking through that in all areas of the curriculum. It's not just in IT, but in all areas, I think that needs to happen. But ideas like this, like like the podcast, getting people to have the opportunity to listen to these things and to hear about this, is, if you think about what channels there are for teachers to know about stuff, we need to change the culture, because there are very few. When you're in the classroom, it's partly because you haven't got the time or energy to find out about new things, because you're so busy just trying to cope with what you're doing. But we need to find ways of unlocking that for people.
That's absolutely true, and it's one of the things I try and stress a lot. Is from the podcast point of view, a couple of things that you spoke about there, which to touch on, and one of them is the fact that that's the reason why, as part of Education on Fire, I wanted to do it in theme series, because season 2 here with computing and Edtech and all that sort of stuff, we've covered an awful lot of things in those things, but there's so much other parts of the curriculum as well, so which is why I want to sort of keep it going, get into season 3, 4 and 5, and so that we can share all of those types of things as well. But of course it also needs to be in a way that people can comprehend as well, and because the podcast medium is always there, this Edtech computing season will stay on the website, it stays on iTunes, and so people can then see that. So once we move into season 3, which is going to be talking about the children, we're going to then move on to music and then sport and well-being and that sort of thing. Because you've got this sort of trail of stuff we've done already, I think this bank of technology and content, which is there all the time, is such a new way of being able to do it. And because you can access it all the time, and also we can update the show notes as well. So as new things come up, we can sort of put an extra link on there. So it'll always be as up to date as we can with those things. I think is incredibly important. And the other thing is it's the ability to go from the inside of the school out. If we're, as teachers, we're just waiting for someone to say this is your next piece of Twilight, or this is your next inset that you've got to go to, then it might not be what you want, it might not quite fit in with where you want to see your class going. Whereas as a teacher, if you can just spend a bit of time just thinking, when you're on your Facebook groups, because there are thousands and thousands of people that I'm chatting to in various groups on any given week, and different organisations and sort of notice boards of things, and the people that have contacted me saying how much they're enjoying listening to the podcast, just sharing that with people, just get other people to listen as well, get some allies in what it is that you want to do, and then as we said just before, from that you can then take that to another teacher, you can take that to your head or take it to your senior management and just say, look, these ideas are here, can I just try this, or they've given me the opportunity to download, this is free, can we just try that? And it just has that little bit more of authority, but it's something you've been able to do and something you can run with, and you can then enjoy your creativity within the confines of what it is that you're having to do within your school. Yeah,
and trying things out and seeing if they work. Children are brilliant at running with new ideas. I remember this is something that Tim Ryland uses actually. It's a program called Myst, which is an adventure game thing, really. But one of my teachers had learned about it, and she discovered it, and she started using it for creative writing. And the phenomenal things that the children were doing, because they were being led through this adventure game with no sound to it at all, no text to it. So they were having to make up the story and describe the story, describe what was happening, and it meant she could use this as a way of developing particularly boys who were intrigued by it and wanting to be involved in it, and they were desperate to keep watching it every week and every session that she was doing it, and I know that Tim's developed some really good stuff using Myst as well. And if you have the confidence to try that in your classroom, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, well, then don't do it. I think there's the opportunity to try things out and do things. I've had children writing music; they loved it. We were using Dance EJ, I think it was, and they were absolutely loving the fact that they were getting an end result. That's the wonderful thing. Children, with the technology that we've got, they have the opportunity to create something and have an end product which is as good as they can go out and buy in the shop quite often, and the technology is there with creativity, with creative arts, but also with physical things, with the cheapness with which 3D printers are becoming. It's possible to produce things. It's possible to create something, and the kids love that. They actually love having an end product that's real, and it's exciting from a teacher's point of view as well, because you suddenly see what your children can do.
It really is, and I think the other thing I like about those things is the fact that you take away the fact that you have to be right, and that's the thing about being creative.
Yeah.
I find it quite a lot. With my children is the fact that but it has to be like this, it has to, I have to get it right, or the teacher will be concerned if I don't, or I get it wrong, or I'll get into trouble, or that sort of thing.
Well, Mrs. May says you have to do your sums like this. Mrs. May says that that you have to use the bus stop method. And you think, well, I don't know what a bus stop is.
Yeah, absolutely, and I had that conversation recently as well in maths. We were talking about, it doesn't have to be that way. Just find the way that works best for this particular situation. But we could go off on that tangent for a long time. But I think what I was trying to remember was the fact that a bit like you were saying about the mist idea. When there's no narrative, when you're making it up, there is no right, there is no wrong. It just is whatever you're creating. And I remember when I was at music college, we had an improvisation class where there was an old sort of 1920s film with no soundtrack, and we just had to make the soundtrack up. So it was all improvised. It was all kind of, right, we're going to start it now. You've literally got 3 minutes until we're going to stop it. Let's hear what you create. And to begin with, that feels funny because it's like, oh, where do I even start? But then you start to watch the film, you think, oh, well, they're excited, so it's probably going to be faster, or look like they might be sad, so it might have a different feel to it, or someone's falling down the stairs, or so, whatever it happens to be, But as soon as you sort of release your fact to the fact, oh, it needs to be in this scale, or it needs to be in this key, or it needs to be like that, forget all of that. Let's just go with it and see where we end up at the end of the 3 minutes. And of course, you get some fantastic results then. And once you sort of get over the fact that you can't get it wrong, it can only be what you've produced. And then if you don't like it, you can do it again next time. And that's just that's a really exciting way to learn, I think.
And well, it's funny you say that because one of my favourite lessons that I used to teach was exactly the opposite of that, because I used to use pieces of music, and I used to say to just get the children, and in fact I did this with all ages from PGCE students through to year twos, get them to lie on the floor and close their eyes and just tell them they're going to watch a film and just get comfortable, and then just play pieces of music. And each time the music changed was a cut in the film, was a change, just a change of direction in the film. But the stories they came out with of what was happening, the power of the tale this music was telling, was different to all children and all participants. And they would develop these stories, and they would quite happily change tack completely and go from a battle scene to some sort of love scene or whatever, in an instant. And they could do that because we're so attuned to these things, the visual and the musical things and the audio things. And exactly like you were saying, the results were phenomenal, to the point where I'd have to fight them off and say, look, I can't listen to all your stories, but keep it for when you're next told you've got to write a story and you've got it there ready for you.
Absolutely. And then to sort of bring that through to to this season, if you follow Lee Parkinson's idea, that story would then be written on a blog, and then you'd post it, and you'd find out where the music was from and what it was, and then you'd add all those things, and then before you know it, like you say, the ICT computing part of it is just purely just an extension of that creativity and those kind of ideas, and that's really where this season is really shown us, I think, is the fact that it's not a subject. It's actually just a modern way, or an up-to-date way of using the tools that we have at our disposal, and it's about
a different way.
Exactly, different. It's where the inspiration and the creativity can take us in this modern age.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for joining me. It's been a great conversation, and it's really nice to sort of to sit back and just sort of see the whole season as a whole, and put that together in terms of what it really does mean for us as teachers in a school, and how we can develop these things. And And I'll look forward to speaking to you again in Season 3. And in Season 3, we're going to be talking to lots of children and people within schools, and I want to find out what it is that excites them, what it is that they really enjoy about school. And I'm going to be creating 10 questions that I'm going to put to schools, and you can have the opportunity to get in contact, either be on the podcast or send them through, and I'll read them out, and just have that chance to see what it is, whether it's any particular country or any particular part of the UK. We'll see if we get some themes going through about what it is that children enjoy and what they don't, and I've got a pretty good idea about where that may go, but I'm always up for some surprises, so we'll look forward to that conversation when we got some information of that.
We will, and I'm looking forward to Season 3 immensely.
Brilliant, lovely. Well, thanks very much, Peter, and we will chat again soon.
Cheers, Mark.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information, please go to educationonfire.com.